Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the open meeting for Thursday, July 15th, 2021, and ask the Commission Secretary for information on today's agenda.
Each Commissioner has independently reviewed the minutes of the open meeting of Thursday, July 1st, 2021, and each has informed me there's no need to discuss the minutes.
We approve the minutes of Thursday, July 1st, 2021. Sorry.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Each Commissioner has independently reviewed the agenda, and each has informed me there's no need to discuss the notices associated with agenda items 2 through 11.
I move we approve the notices of investigation associated with agenda items 2 through 9.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Move we approve the notices of proceeding associated with agenda items 10 and 11.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that brings us to agenda item 12, which is docket 1-CAF-100. This is the first budget under a newly enacted law, 2021 Wisconsin Act 24, which establishes consumer advocate funding for the Citizens Utility Board. So what this did is, in addition to allowing Citizens Utility Board to seek approval of a budget of up to $900,000 per year, it also abolished a portion of the allowable amounts that CUB could get under the traditional IC program, intervenor comp, and then also abolished that intervenor compensation grant program. So what was filed is a budget that would cover the period of July 1st, 2021 through the end of this year. And there's a lot that goes into it. We have the responsibility to review their budget, to ask questions, to ensure that the proposed budget covers reasonable annual costs of CUB, and that those costs are directly or indirectly related to representing and protecting the interests of residential, small commercial, and small industrial customers. If we do not take action within 60 days, it's considered to be approved. So this morning in front of us, we have just that 6 months budget, and there was an analysis by staff, a couple of corrections made, and the budget represents a shift, right? So it's a shift from the old funding mechanism to this new funding mechanism. And one of the consistent concerns we heard from CUB was that they were operating on a shoestring budget, and their board of directors had directed them to have an operating reserve. And coming into this, their operating reserve was zero. So part of the request in what's in front of us is to fund their operating reserve. This one is tough for me. When I saw the initial request, my eyes got a little large. But I also understand the important role that CUB plays for us and our proceedings and ensuring that the records reflect the interests of those residential, small commercial, and industrial customers. That being said, I have a couple of proposed revisions. So all told, they initially requested $669,989. And again, that's to get to the end of 2021. They then, through conversations with our Chief Financial Officer, Jenna Schmidt, they identified an error related to office relocation expenses. That's the other thing, is they're moving.
Right.
So it's kind of a perfect storm in terms of they locked into a new lease given what the real estate market was doing during the pandemic, but they still have their current lease, so there's a little bit of overlap. So I recognize that there are expenses in here that I deem to be one-time expenses. Same with the operating reserves. That's a one-time kind of where we're front-loading if we choose to fund that. But at the end of the day, they requested $657,489,000. That's what their revised amount comes in at. And that takes out the $12,500 related to relocation expenses, and it also removes the $127,500 of additional revenue that was identified. So when I look at this, my proposal is to remove $100,000 of the $220,000 they requested for their operating reserve funds, and that would put the total to get them to the end of the year at $557,489. And again, funding the operating reserve should be a one-time cost, which means that on a going forward basis, the annual budget that we receive should be well below that $900,000 threshold or limit that's in the law. I think it's important to note that $900,000 is a limit. It's not a given that would be provided each and every year. And I think it's also important to remember that these costs are being paid for by utility customers. So I think we always have to keep that in mind. So it's a balance that we have to strike to ensure that CUB has a stable source of funding and that they are able to hire additional people, that they're able to modernize their facilities in order to continue to be a very worthy party in all of our proceedings. But I think that it needed to be reduced. So that's the number that I came up with. I also would require them to do the quarterly reports as they were required under the former grant program. So I would have that reporting continue under this new funding mechanism. And then I would also require that they file their annual budget by September 15th of each year. So that's where I stand on the new funding for CUB.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'll start from the back end. I agree, first of all, on the reporting requirements quarterly and the September 15th submission of their budget. And having talked to the legislature about this bill several times and, trying to tackle over the years the issue of CUB's funding and its, ability to stay stable over the years, among the groups, this came as a resolution. So, when I first, when I first saw the 6-month budget, my eyes popped a little bit because it was like, 3/4 of what you would typically maybe see in a year. But then reading through their submission, I too understood I hope and expect that there are a lot of one-time expenses in here as well. But all that said, you're right that CUB has basically always been funded with ratepayer dollars. This is just a greater scale, like up to 3 times as much now, because honestly, their development has not been robust. And I think also in the future, we need to have a discussion about whether or not at this scale, then the state should continue to fund a nonprofit to have a development director, because that's essentially what we're doing. I understand the person does other things, but, and they even admit that the incentive and it's going to be harder to raise money now too, given the larger pot of money that they're getting from the state. But these are ratepayer dollars. So as the ratepayer advocate, they should approach their own budget just like they approach the scrutiny of a ratepayer utility case. And I hope they're doing that. I understand they have to move, they have to get all new equipment and all that stuff, but it should be in proportion to the dollars that they have coming in. So I hope they're mindful of all of that. What also concerns me is that, we don't know if we're going to be hybrid or in person or not. That's going to increase the expenses because as we're seeing here at the state, we're going hybrid on things and we're now ordering equipment and we're doing this and you have an office, but you also have more equipment at home. So again, be mindful of the ratepayer dollars being spent here, just like is their mission. I suppose be true to their mission. I, though, am at the opposite spot for you on the operating reserve. I think having it fully funded up, because they're not going, it's not going to be a 25% infusion every budget. But it's important for them to have an operating budget, because in the past, when they have gone very low, I know they've had issues, and because of the biennial budget, the 2-year cycle, if they have a lot of rate cases or activity in a certain cycle, and we're 4-6 months out from a budget being passed, and they're running low, they will need to use that reserve fund rather than, unless they can go out and raise money. So I think it's more important for them to reserve fund rather than, for example, maybe they don't need to buy all of the equipment right away. Mm-hmm. Maybe not everyone needs a monitor at home and a monitor in the office, or recording equipment or podcasting equipment, as I see they have in there. And I think that I had asked, because that moving expense, when I first saw the moving expense at $77,000, I'm like, well, shit, I'm in the wrong business. Because I was like, is that moving? But it includes a lot of other things, right? It includes the equipment. Sorry. It was just a lot of money for moving. It was like 2 men a truck, could be cheaper. But it includes all their expenses. So I thought we should keep the overall number the same. I was okay at the 657, but put your operating reserve at 220, at the 25%, and take the money from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Okay, can you say that last part?
Sure. The overall number, 657, fine.
Okay.
But they should fully fund their operating reserve, because I think in the future they're not going to always be able to keep it there, and just remove that money from a different line item or spend less on, something else, equipment, etc. I'd rather have them have an operating reserve than podcasting equipment, right, for example, just throwing it out there.
Okay.
So that was my suggestion.
Okay. So you'd be at 657, 489.
Yes, 657, 489. Just that, so that they have an operating reserve equal to 25%. So it was a little over 220 then.
Okay.
It was like maybe, what was it, Jenna? 19,000?
19,000.
More. So they'd shift 19,000 into the reserve and take away 19,000 from some other line item.
Okay. Commissioner Huebner?
Okay, one sec. Great. Well, thank you. Yes, as you said, Chair, this is definitely a shift to a new model, but one that was supported obviously by the legislature in a bipartisan fashion. And I think, as you both have said, CUB's role here at the commission, we don't have a lot of interveners, and CUB is one very consistent one that can provide excellent information to supplement the record. So I too was supportive of the full budget. The way I looked at this was the $450,000 roughly for half a year, which is about half of the $900,000 that they're asking for, and then that one-time reserve supplement, which I thought was important to establish. That's something that they haven't been able to establish. This is going to be, in my view, the year to do it, because going forward, I don't know what their budget request will be, but it's probably going to be closer to the full allotment if they have 6 qualified staff, which I know that's their goal. So I was actually at the alternative 1 for the budget. The full amount, I would take out the $12,500 and so I guess that puts us at maybe 3 slightly different positions on the reserve, whether to do 220, whether to do the full 25%, or whether to do a lesser amount. I would be more inclined to do the full 25%, unless you change your position to more the budget as proposed, less the $12,500.
Well, isn't it 657 the last? That
is the last.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And then what about reporting and?
Yeah, I was at alternative 1 for both of those. I would quarterly reporting at this time recognizing it is different. You know, we don't have a list of dockets, which we usually would get with the $300,000 grant. So let's keep it as it is, and then we'll take it up in future years as to whether that's onerous or needs to change. But I think at this time it's the most prudent way, and then I would agree with September 15th. I think that sounds like the right schedule to be on.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I'm just going to reiterate, I hope that the budget request that comes in September 15th for 2022 is not for $900,000. I hope that if we agree to the budget at $657,489, direct them to fully fund their operating reserve bucket. I am hoping that they will be able to manage through expenses and to sharpen pencils for 2022. You know, and maybe they don't need to double staff right away. You know, and I don't know, I mean, the job market, look at what we've run into even here at the commission. It's not as easy as finding a giant pool of qualified people right away.
Right.
So maybe they don't double right away, but I would just message that, again, yes, it's extremely important. They're the only one in the country that is funded this way.
Yep.
But that makes it a little more complicated, and I just want to ensure that we're striking the right balance, always keeping in mind that these are utility customer dollars at the end of the day. And so I can join you at approving the $657,489 and funding the operating reserve bucket to the is 25%.
25%.
Yeah.
What their board.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm okay
Right.
with that.
Yep. And I think that's pretty that's a 3-month operating budget, and that's pretty standard for nonprofits, at least as a starting point. So I was comfortable with that.
Yeah, you would know.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I've been in that world, and
Right.
I didn't get to fund my 90-day reserve in one shot.
Right.
So this is a unique opportunity, but we've known Cub's financial situation, and the legislature recognized that, and I think we have that chance, as you said, Commissioner Nowak, that if there's a big year and they need to have a lot of experts and invoicing and all of that, this gives them that chance to have that financial flexibility. So,
and the legislation did recognize the need for a reserve fund, and I do think it's important, but you know, I join you, Chair, in your concerns about the next budget coming forward and what it's going to look like. And again, just, you know, this entity needs to, you know, practice what it preaches as well then, is when it submits a budget, that's all. But because their work is valuable here, and it's helpful, but now that it's in such greater proportion funded by ratepayer dollars and the reporting requirements, they, you know, part of the compromise was that there would be more scrutiny on it. And so I think that we're fulfilling our role there. So, all right, are we ready for a motion? Or
just so that we're clear, someone else has done the math, so you can have confidence in it. So I understand where the commission is at. You would approve the budget of $657,489. A line item adjustment would be to reduce the office relocation down to $57,263, so that the operating reserve would be at the full 25%, which would be $239,737. So that's basically a shift of $19,737. And then you're all at the reporting conditions as well as the submission deadline.
Do we have to be that prescriptive? Do we have to tell them where to take it out? That would be my question. I mean, if they can find
manage to it,
manage to that number, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I'm happy with that too.
You know, I don't.
Yeah.
So it would set the operating reserve, but then.
Yeah.
My only suggestion then is if they should probably submit the revised budget so that we can see where they are taking that line item reduction. So I would add that condition that they need to fund it, but then should submit, again, for informational purposes, then that final budget as approved with that adjustment.
Would it be included in the quarterly report?
It could be.
Could be.
It could be.
Okay, so maybe do it that way.
Yep.
You want it with their first
quarterly
report to submit the updated budget. Okay.
I don't think we need to be that prescriptive again.
Okay.
If they can find savings elsewhere, I think that's
Okay.
fine.
Yeah. Up to the agency.
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Mhm. Okay. Docket 1, CAF 100, I move that we approve operating budget of $657,489 for the Citizens Utility Board of Wisconsin for 2021. And they file quarterly reports with us regarding their budgeting and also submit their annual budget to us no later than September 15th of each year. And direct staff to draft an order consistent with our discussion today.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That brings us to agenda item 13. Docket 5-TI-2827. This relates to the joint application of Time Warner Cable and Charter. Together, we refer to them as the charter entities. They have filed an application with us for designation as an eligible telecommunications carrier in order to avail themselves of dollars under the RDOF, or the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. That's one of the requirements of RDOF, and in our somewhat lengthy discussion of that application, we talked about the admin code in Wisconsin requires that the ETC designation follow the wire line. Is that the right word? Yeah, wire center. And we have in the past modified that and allowed it to be a smaller area and go to the census block. And in our discussion during our open meeting, there was some back and forth between all of us about exactly what they were requesting. And at the end of the day, I think, I don't want to speak for all of us, but I understood their request to be that they only wanted ETC designation for portions of census blocks. They didn't want us to extend that ETC designation to full census blocks because that would have put on additional requirements related to the provision of service under the Universal Service Fund. They've now come back to us and they have asked us to either reopen our decision or rehear it. So they cite Chapter 227 as a basis to reopen, and that doesn't apply because this isn't a contested case. So in terms of legal analysis, I think that particular provision misses the mark. And they make a lot of statements about, well, if you require us to be an ETC for the entire census block, that's at odds with the purpose of RDOF, and it's not serving the public interest because we are going to have to expend a certain amount of dollars in order to meet that designation for the partial census blocks. And I think it's important to note that of their entire request, it's just 2.4% that are partial census blocks. So we're not talking a huge amount. I also think it's really important, and this I think sometimes gets missed in the conversation, and that is that it's sort of an asymmetrical marriage between using universal service funds for the purpose of broadband expansion. It's a little like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. So the interests aren't going to align because the purpose of the Universal Service Fund was codified, and it's codified under the Federal Communications Act, and that is to provide universal service, voice service, to everybody. that's not the same goal of broadband expansion. So I understand that the federal government is trying to take dollars and use those dollars, stretch those dollars to make them go far. But I think it's important to remember that the purpose of the Universal Service Fund is to fund universal service. It's not to fund broadband. So there's a little bit of tension between, I have a hard time, I guess, accepting the argument that adhering to the ETC designation requirements is somehow at odds with deploying broadband, because it's not apples to apples. You're not talking about the same thing. So that's a really long way of me saying I'm not exactly sure where I stand on this. So I wanted so I just wanted to kind of set the stage. But I really, when I look at this, I go back and forth and I say, okay, yes, you're right. It's going to cost money to go in and resell, right? Is it going to cost a lot of money? It's relative, right? In terms of how much revenue do you have on an annual basis? How much of RDOF funding did you get? And it's a choice, right? They're not required to go out and seek those RDOF dollars. That's the other thing. And my concern is just this gradual chipping away at the Universal Service Fund. And I just want to make sure that we're remembering what the purpose of that fund is. So I'm really anxious to hear from both of you.
Okay. Well, it may not surprise you where I'm at, since if you read my concurrence from our last decision and our last discussion about this. But first, we use the Universal Service Fund for a lot of things, and we have used it to fund broadband over the years. So I think we can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. And, you know, I think it is hard to, when we've got the different funding pots coming through, whether it's RDOF or what's the purpose of ETC. I mean, this is yes, about having universal service and that provider of last resort, but it's also, this goes to the deployment of broadband, which is talked about every single day in this state and how necessary it is. So I think that we shouldn't do anything that stands in the way of universal service and further broadband deployment. And I think that, you know, moving this forward at granting their request is appropriate, because if you remember, whenever we took this up and whenever, I was conflicted on whether I should even join as a dissent or not. And I didn't want to dissent because, you know, I wanted them to continue to proceed with the RDOF funding in the full census block areas. But I had believed that we should grant them partial status and ETC status in those partial census blocks because of the unnecessary burden it would place on any entity, not just Tartar, because we're going to have more coming in the future. You know, it doesn't make sense to have them go try to resell in an area where it doesn't need to be done. I think we have to do the best we can to match up these goals. This isn't the last we're going to see of this. We're going to see more. And if, I don't know how, you know, well, it's what, 395 partial census blocks out of all theirs. So yeah, is it a small percentage overall of theirs? But what are we going to do the next time when it's maybe 25%? How are we going to justify the difference then? So to me, it is important that we do this. It helps both goals move forward. There is no harm to the public, I think, in moving forward with their request. That is, I think, the biggest, one of the, you know, there is no downside for the public here. There will be universal service where it is needed. This doesn't frustrate that purpose, and it helps with broadband deployment. So to me, it's a win-win. So I think we should amend the final order to reflect that. I think we should have them, we did get a late filing from them yesterday because staff also had raised, well, this might be a difficult thing to figure out. Where are the exact partial locations? And sounds like they're really willing to work together with staff and figure it out and give them the necessary computer files, share, et cetera. So, you know, I would add it to amend the order saying that they should work with staff to provide the necessary information in a format usable by staff necessary going forward. So it might soften a little bit of the condition that was proposed in our memo, just to say, work with staff to provide it in a readable, usable format. I don't want us to get too prescriptive about that, but it would only, again, be for those partial census block locations. I don't know if it was a typo when you look at subalternative, because I was at subalternative kind of A, but it said ETC tracking within the charter census blocks and partial census block areas. We're only talking about the tracking within the partial, so I would strike, anything regarding the full census block.
And then what about Subalt B?
No, I don't think so. I don't know what the cost would be. And again, I don't like to just kind of approve a blank check. And again, this is a little bit like a gas line extension. If we have to get new software or a license for something, I don't think it's the first time we're going to see this. This is going to be used by everybody who's ever coming in, all staff. I don't know why we should just assess one company for it, because then how do we go back and credit them and all that? So I think if we need to do it, I think staff was not sure that they even needed to do it. But I wouldn't, one, put a blanket unknown cost on any entity we regulate, and then two, that it's likely to be used by other entities or all, the public entities. So I was not at all subalternate C.
Okay, so you're at Subalt A and you would remove census blocks and just have it read charter partial census blocks.
And have it just read sharing information and shape files with data and shape files. I don't know what programming work means. I asked that. I don't know what that means. I don't know what kind of data. I just, in a workable format so that they can work with staff to support the development of a tool to facilitate EC tracking within the partial census block area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I was at alternative 2 on this. I think that the additional information that they provided was helpful. I think specifically their agreement that they will provide the information needed to staff. I think that was one of the big questions last time we took this up, is do we have the capability administratively to do this? Charter's saying here that they will take on that burden or as much of it as they can on behalf of staff. That was helpful to me, but I also, as you both alluded, this is ETC is related to telephone, and RDOF is broadband, and so it's not a perfect match. So I'm viewing that as a unique circumstance related to the ETC designation, that it's based on this broadband expansion RDOF funding, and it doesn't therefore apply to our existing ETCs, absent some other unique circumstance that they would bring to us. But in this case, I would, I guess, modify my previous decision and go with the ability to do the ETC designation on partial census block basis for the areas where they have RDOF funding. And then I was fine with subalternative A as written myself. And I was also fine with subalternative B. My understanding is we put that in an order before where we felt we may have to incur costs, and it wasn't used in that case, but it would protect us a little bit in case that is needed. So I was okay with subalternative B myself. So that's where I stand.
Subalt A you wouldn't modify.
Yeah, I guess I thought it was written fine.
But I don't have
a big.
Yeah, I don't think the full census block thing was even what I think that was not even what we're looking for.
Right.
We didn't. We weren't looking for full census data on the full census blocks. We just want to be able to track the partial locations of the partial.
Alyssa, did we ask for full census block information?
Yes, in the previous order, you asked for, a spreadsheet of all the census blocks, so that's the data, the census block was in service. Initial order.
Right, but the addresses, like the specific locations, that's where I just want to clarify that you're not asking for every single address in every full census block.
Right.
Okay.
So with that, I just want to make sure we're not restricting the information.
Right. No, I just didn't want to get more than what we were asking for previously.
Right.
If you're saying you're not asking for individual addresses, I don't think we should get individual addresses in the full census blocks because that's not what we asked for before. The purpose is how do we know what parts of partial census blocks, and that's why you need that.
The shape.
And they want it to be kept. They also want it to be kept confidential.
Right, which I was also.
Yeah.
Right, which is, I mean, that's standard.
Yeah.
It should never be an obstacle for companies sharing information.
Right.
Okay, all right. Of the two alternatives, I came in thinking I was between 2 and 4. I will join you both at alternative 2. So I will grant the request. And I would stay with subalt A and subalt B. I would do both. Understanding that what we're seeking in subalt A is really just what we ordered previously, but also taking them up on their offer to provide the deployment data and shape files for the 395 partial census blocks.
For the partial and not the individual criteria in the full census block. If that's the understanding, if everyone understands what programming work means, again, I just want them to work together with staff. Okay.
And I think the what we received late yesterday, which I did read, indicates that there is a willingness to work.
Yeah, no, there's a willingness. I just, I want something to come up later. Okay, I will not join you on the assessment of the cost.
Okay.
If I could just, so we're all clear on the process. So as you noted, Chair, the applicable statutory provision in which we're working is 19639, which prohibits us from just changing an order. The law requires an opportunity to be heard and noticed. So the next steps would be the sending out of a notice of our intent to modify our decision and request for comment. One question I had, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, is I don't know that we actually know which of the 13,000 census blocks they've identified that were set forth in detail in Appendix A are the 2.4% that we did. I appreciate perhaps that's confidential or not, but we need some way of knowing which of those parcels. So might I suggest that maybe in the request for comment back, we ask Charter to provide us, whether that be public or confidential, depending on the nature of the information, so that we know exactly which partial census blocks we're talking about, unless staff already knows that. We do not. So
yes, that's a great suggestion.
We're eventually going to need to know that.
right, because we'll have to modify our Appendix A to reflect in some way these are the designations of full and there's a designation of partial. So hopefully the ones that are partial are not confidential. I appreciate maybe the areas within that partial and the shape files may be, but staff, we can work with the company on that. But that would be the procedural next step. And in the interest of time, one other suggestion in other instances where we have had to follow this statutory process, you have indicated that there is no opposition, that then the order can be entered by the commission secretary. If opposition comments are received, then it would be returned to the commission. Is that process acceptable?
Yeah.
It is to me.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Then in docket 5 TI 2827, that we grant the request of of order to reopen and amend the order regarding ATC status, consistent with our discussion today.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
No,
That brings us to agenda item 14, which is docket 9806-CE-100. This is the application for a certificate of public convenience and necessity of Darien Solar Energy LLC to construct a solar energy 250 megawatt generation facility in the town of Bradford. And Commissioner Huebner is going to lead our discussion today.
Thank you, Chair. Darien Solar LLC, a subsidiary of Invenergy, has proposed a 250 megawatt AC solar photovoltaic generating facility to be located on approximately 2,045 acres in Walworth and Rock counties. Interveners in the proceeding included Renew Wisconsin and American Transmission Company. The party hearing, public hearing opportunities were held virtually on April 22nd, 2021. We received public comments during the development of the environmental assessment, and again, public comment period from March 16th to April 28th. We received 20 written public comments during that period, and 10 individuals also participated in the public hearing. Again, in front of us today is an application for a merchant generating plant. So under the CPCN statute, many requirements apply, but items related to need and economic factors are not part of our decision today. We Energies, Wisconsin Public Service, and Madison Gas and Electric have proposed to acquire this project in a separate docket where the economics and needs, among other factors, for those utilities are evaluated. All the land for this project has been voluntarily leased or offered for purchase by the landowners. For this proposal, our job is to consider whether the design and location is in the public interest, including alternative locations, individual hardships, safety, reliability, and environmental factors. There were some opposing commenters, specifically during the EA process, and those comments were folded into the EA. But this project received a lot of public support from public comment and the public. Many comments indicated support due to increasing Wisconsin's energy independence by using in-state resources, economic development, job creation, reduced emissions, improved health, pollinator-friendly and perennial plantings, and their ability to retain and rebuild the soil and pollinator habitats, reducing runoff of soil and fertilizers into Turtle Creek, among others. One aspect I found unique was we heard from more supportive comments from farmers and people in the agricultural industries than I've seen in similar dockets thus far. I picked out a couple that I thought were eye-opening. Rachel Kirkley of the Dollar Dairy Farm stated this project is a lifesaver for her family. We are not done farming. We are just farming something new, something renewable, something great. This solar farm is everything to my family, and we're so happy to be part of it. Another farmer, Gary Kincaid, said, protecting our land for future use is also our first priority. We are stewards of the land. We have surmised that the solar project does both, financial as well as preservation of land. We are just farming a different crop with the sun, but being much more efficient in the process. There was numerous other comments like that I found, but those stood out to me. Just a couple more opening comments. My thoughts on this is I think this project is in the public interest for the state of Wisconsin. We've talked about these for the other merchant plants, but it meets our state energy priority requirements for new electricity, with solar energy among the second highest priority on our energy priorities law. The state's electricity generation mix is shifting. As the Wisconsin Conservative Energy Forum points out, this is an opportunity to harness an energy source we have right here in the state. It's a clean and renewable source of energy. After construction, it will not produce any air pollution, any water pollution, or use any water in the process. It does not require any fuels to be brought to the site. For 30 years or more, the project will have complete ground cover on what is today row cropped land. The applicant predicts reducing phosphorus by 457 pounds a year and nitrogen by 2,172 pounds of nitrogen per year. And there is a nearby river, the Turtle Creek, in the area. The economic benefits, the landowners will receive lease payments. A number of neighbors are participating in good neighbor agreements. And finally, about $1 million annually will be provided to the local governments who are hosting the project, about $583,000 going to the counties and about $417,000 to the townships, both allocated based on the ultimate number of megawatts in those jurisdictions. I don't need to discuss any of the uncontested items. And with that, I'll pass it to you, Chair Vach, if you have any opening comments.
I don't. I mean, I think you did a really good job covering it all. I'll just reiterate what we've said in the past, and that is, I think, key for the success of these projects is local community support. And this is about land use, and it's about working together with private property owners. And as you pointed out, this is a situation where the developer did a good job in doing just that, in reaching out and laying the groundwork early. And so beyond everything that you covered, that's the only point that I would want to reiterate.
Yeah, nothing more to add. I mean, this is an entity we've seen come here in the past with other developments, and they do have a history of working with the locals, and a lot of this is up to the local jurisdictions to work out those agreements, and those are critical. And again, they've, I think, done a good job here.
Do you need to discuss any of the uncontested?
No, I do not.
Okay. So that moves us ahead to issue 3. If approved, would the proposed project comply with statute 196-491 3D6 and not unreasonably increase orderly land use and development plans for the area involved? As you just said, Chair and Commissioner Nowak, there's a lot of local support. Obviously, the landowners are voluntarily offering this land, and we heard many comments and read many comments related to that. In addition, I don't know that we saw a final joint development agreement, but I do think there was one in process between the developer and the local communities. So I was at alternative compliance. Chair?
I was there as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Issue 4 is uncontested, so we move to issue 5. Our normal citing was streamlined a little bit here. So the one we have in front of us right now is the design and location of the proposed project in the public interest, considering the citing criteria. And this is for both the proposed and alternate arrays. And I did not find any specific issues raised for any of the array areas. Some of these projects, there are specific issues on some of the spots. I didn't see any that really raised up in this one. So I was at alternative 1 to approve all of the proposed and alternatives.
I agree. I was at 1.
Same spot.
Yeah. Issue 6 is a lot of general conditions similar to those we've included in prior electric construction orders. I will just note that B, C, and D are items that we've typically discussed, and because we've continued to be in the same position time after time, this docket catches up and includes those in the record from the beginning. And so I thought that was a great efficiency in the process, and make sure that the developer knows that those are coming when we get to today. Also, just happy to see on D the agreement that between the developers and their ultimate construction teams, that those meetings are needed between DNR and commission staff and construction team. The applicant, when we get to the alternative, the applicant had some questions about 6B. I'm fine with all of these conditions. I'm at alternative 1 and including all of them. I think that 6B as written is exactly how we've done it in other orders, so I want to stay consistent where we can. So I was at alternative 1 with all the conditions. Chair?
I agree with you, and I would just echo your comment that staff did a really good job in listening to what we've said in the last few of these solar dockets and really synthesizing those into these general conditions. So I'm also at alt 1 with all of this. Commissioner Noy.
Yeah, I agree. I also suggested some other ones too that they could probably throw into the general conditions regarding the electrical code, and I can't remember the other one we always talk about. It will come up in a moment, or maybe it's uncontested, to put it in there. I think I know they raised an issue on B. It's just a notice requirement. We've already approved the arrays. It's just letting us know, and maybe they have to do that anyway. And maybe it's ultimately not. It's just saying if you end up using an alternative array, just tell us. that you're using an alternative. It doesn't, we know that there's no, we've already approved it, so there's not an additional landowner issue. So I'm okay with it.
Okay, issue 7A is related to stray voltage testing, and essentially what it comes down to, I think there's one thing pointed out here, and then one clarification I wanted to offer, and this is related to offering stray voltage testing at each agricultural confined animal operation. And I think it's important to note that it says to make available stray voltage testing. So first off, it's to make it available. We've had one solar project come through with a 300-foot, but every other one we've done a half mile. Our wind siting administrative code has it as a half mile. My gut is to have it at a half mile. That the benefit is that we want to sort of allay any possible concerns and fears by offering this both before and after, so that it doesn't come up later for the developer. So I was at the half mile, but my clarification was that, and I think we've talked about this in the past, that would be from the location of the project infrastructure. So the word project, or the term project area, is in here, and that can mean different things based on maybe what map you're looking at. But what I would have it be is a half a mile from the actual infrastructure. So if that's the fence lines of the solar arrays, or a half a mile from the gen tie line, whatever the pieces of infrastructure are, that's where we count the half mile, and not all the land that's under lease, because not all of it's going to be actually used. So that's where I was at. So Chair Rock.
I was also staying with the half a mile. I think the one time we deviated, it was because there weren't any facilities, if I remember correctly. But I was comfortable staying at the half mile to be consistent with our past decisions and what's in the code. And I'm okay with your clarification that it's the facility, not the actual area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, the last time we did this within 300 miles, there were two reasons. I think there weren't any. Right. And then, but at one, we did have on our website.
Yeah, the AFRs.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, they went with that, and I think they did that here too. So, and I think the evidence they put in the record here is really unrebutted. Mm-hmm. That this is the best available modern technology. It's underground, it's insulated. There's very few, and even 300 feet, and that's why they also 300 feet. When you look at the weight of the evidence, they put in more, and I think it comes in stronger. It's unrebutted, essentially. We're just going with a half a mile because we've done it before.
Right.
Just because we've done it. And so I have always struggled with this and I asked staff to too, look at what are other jurisdictions doing with it? Because why not a mile then? Why not 3/4 of a mile? And there's no evidence to the contrary why a half a mile is magic. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to have that in there. It's not substantial evidence to say we've done it before.
Yeah.
So, and also, okay, does it help? And just because we don't order it doesn't mean they can't do it. Maybe someone approaches them, they'll probably do it. I don't know. It's up to them. This is a company decision, whoever ends up, whether it's when Invenergy owns it or a successor. And if they want to assume the risk further down the line, that's their choice. Mm. We shouldn't tell a business that we're going to tell you how to do risk management right now. So I think we should go with the 300, and so I would be an alternative too.
Do you agree with the clarification that it's from the whatever the measurement is from the facility?
Yeah, I think we've done it before. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to stick with the half mile. I'm leaning. I know we don't have solar specific siting laws. We do have a wind siting law, so I think until that's what I'm kind of leaning on, is that the administrative codes that we do have for similar facilities are half mile. So I'm looking at the 300 feet as
A deviation.
a deviation, or almost like it was a mistake that was missed the one time we did it. So,
Right. I agree with that. And the truth of the matter is there are a lot of decisions we make that are based on what we've done in the past. The other point is that these are, and we've all acknowledged the fact that these are new types of generating facilities. So the real answer is we don't know. And so I'm comfortable sticking with half a mile and using your clarification.
okay.
Yeah, I'll stay where I'm at. I think
Yep.
you can't compare wind to solar, and this is this is based on their record. So I'll stay right now.
Okay. So 7B was uncontested, so we're moving to, and 7C as well. 7D was as well, although I will just note on 7D, that's related to the battery energy storage. We've reopened related to Paris on that. There was a lot of information provided in a data request at a certain point during the process that, staff has not been able to fully review all of that at this point. So everyone's comfortable with this language, but it's clear that staff will be further reviewing this, and if they identify the issues, that can come back to the full commission.
Yeah, and I think the only thing with the battery, being in this and the other ones, it's, we don't even know that it's the solar project itself that's going to charge the batteries. I mean, it could be whatever comes over the transmission system. So I think for, full public disclosure and knowledge, the batteries, they aren't necessarily that we know until we going to be charged by the solar panel.
Yeah, and the other thing that came in was similar to what we saw with Paris was MISO has a new process for what they call supplemental interconnections to kind of fully use the equipment. So that was one of the reasons why they were able to provide more information and clarify their ask here. So I think that's a good new process, and I hope it works. But obviously staff needs to review this from a safety reliability perspective. So we're moving on to 7E, which is related to potential impacts to AV. I'm not sure which alternative this is, but I would support and I guess, support the wildlife monitoring program. They're offering to do that, but I would essentially have that as a condition that they follow through and offer that. We've had that in numerous of the past. We did full studies on a couple early on. We've had some where we had nothing. They're offering to do the wildlife monitoring. That's a position I've had throughout these dockets, is that all the developers should be doing that. So that's where I'm at.
Okay, so you're agreeing with the applicant.
Yeah.
That they've committed to implement the wildlife monitoring program, but nothing in addition to that.
Correct.
Yep. That's where I was as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I frankly think this is an issue that comes up every single time we do one of these. My suggestion is that until we know more, if there are, it probably should not continue to be a potential order point. We have the same information until some new information comes along. I'm not sure why we talk about it.
I think we're at different positions. When it's not offered by the developer, I've been at a different position. So for whatever that's worth.
Yeah.
Okay. Issue 8 is compliance with WEPA. That's uncontested, and issue 8B is related to will the proposed project have undue adverse impact on other environmental values? I'm at alternative 1 that it would not. Chair Bach?
I'm also at alt 1.
I agree.
Okay. And then there was one other item that was raised in the record before we do the final approval here, and it was raised related to the environmental assessment and whether or not the analysis done, Renew's witness brought it up, Energy kind of piled on in their rebuttal or surrebuttal that positive benefits are not being reflected in the EA. So I didn't want to make a decision here today, but wanted to get your thoughts, since we don't get to talk otherwise, as to whether you thought, should staff look into those suggestions and see if it's viable, or did you have any thoughts about that testimony?
Especially when it's a merchant, our analysis of the application is really well defined, right? And the environmental analysis is also very well defined. And for me personally, it makes me nervous to expand the scope of what is in our admin code. If the legislature sees fit that we should be including additional information into our analyses, then I think that could be included. I think that in a roundabout way, we do consider and look at additional benefits. I think we look at it through the lens of what's in the public interest. And so I do think in certain projects, we hear more about what are those additional societal benefits. I think that comes through in some cases, but for me personally, I don't feel comfortable expanding what we would require in any type of analysis. I don't feel comfortable expanding beyond what's in the law.
Yep. And it certainly doesn't, the interveners, we saw from Clean Wisconsin, a previous one, talking more about water and nitrates and things. So I think that obviously that is, any intervener can bring that to the record and we'll consider it. So I found it valuable in both the last case and this case, these different approaches. So great. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I don't think we should basically rewrite the code based on, what an intervener says. And they, like you said, they can bring it up in their comments. And if we're going to do it for one type of generation, we have to do it for all.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Okay. The final issue then is issue 9, and that is granting the CPCN. So I'm at alternative 2, yes, with the conditions we discussed today.
I agree.
Okay. Then in docket 9806, we approve the application for Energy Center LLC for a CPCN consistent with our discussion today.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That concludes our official business for today. The next open meeting is scheduled for Thursday, July 22nd, 2021 at 10:30 a.m.
And we stand adjourned until Thursday, July 22nd.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.